welcome everyone to join us, and thank you for making time for having a little bit of time for us and chat with us about this topic. Very quick introductions. My name is Sachin Gupta. I am the VP of Product Management here at DQ. I have a little over 15 years of experience, which has nothing to do with my age. I just started really early, so I'm still very young. Have been in product development, delivery, and management for most of the time, but I've also led service delivery organizations in various groups. With that, over to you, Harris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Harris Schneiderman. Do product management here at DQ, formerly web development. Really excited that you've all joined us and excited to showcase the top 3 accessibility issues and how to find and fix them. Back to you, Sachin.
Fabulous. Thank you. Really quick, for the agenda today, we'll be covering 3 main topics. We'll start off with showing some data to you in terms of what coverage means for accessibility and what automation can do. That'll be the first 10 or 15 minutes of the presentation. Then we'll move into how to find and fix these issues without being an accessibility expert. And the emphasis being without being an accessibility expert. And we have some really cool code demos put together by Harris for you on that. And then we'll finally wrap it up with how to prevent these issues from getting into development, right? Wouldn't it be cool if we can actually stop these issues from making into your first QA automation engineer's hand? So that's sort of the structure of this. At any point of time, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat window through the Q&A panel. And one of us will be taking a look at it from time to time and answering those as we go. So let's jump into terms that we will use throughout. So you will notice that we will hear WCAG and Web Content Accessibility Guidelines interchangeably. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, really is a set of guidelines that have been put together by World Wide Web Consortium. I said it right this time, W3C. For accessibility, they are actually very technology agnostic. So they are written in such a way that they can be applied to any digital content. And for those of you who are new to the industry, they are split between, they come in different versions. They have 2.0, 2.1, 2.2 is coming out. And then each one of them have different rules that come in at levels A, level AA, level AAA. And the levels really are associated with how much conformance you're getting. And as you go from A to AA to AAA, they become more inclusive. So most of the accessibility testing is done across this WCAG guideline, these WCAG guidelines. You'll also see us using success criteria and SC interchangeably. Most of the times SC is used in conjunction with WCAG. So SC is really the testable criteria for those guidelines that I was referring to earlier. You will notice them being written as 1.1.1, 1.1.2, 2.1.1, so on. They are just numbers, and we'll talk about what the 3 that we are going to pick, what they mean. We'll not refer to them as numbers. We'll tell you what those specific criteria are. You'll also notice that we will use accessibility and A11Y interchangeably. It's a very industry standard term. There are 11 letters between A and Y in the word accessibility. That's why A11Y is used for it a lot of times as well. The last 2 things, when we use automated testing, we are usually referring to fully automated testing. Most of the times, these are click of button things. If we use automated testing for something else, we will note it otherwise. And when we use automation during the slides, that usually refers to automated plus semi-automated testing. So Harris will show some of that with you in his part of the presentation. So let's get into the WCAG coverage and automation. So as a product owner or as a system owner, one of the things that actually concerns me the most is I don't want to release anything which will not work as expected. And how can I guarantee that it'll work as expected? That's usually using testing. I actually follow this. What you can't test, you can't trust. So my focus most of the times is anything that is being released has to be tested 100%. Every single functionality needs to be tested. That is what is usually called 100% coverage, that my testing is giving me 100% coverage of my application. What that means in terms of accessibility, though, becomes very interesting. So when it comes to accessibility, there are two ways in which you can think of coverage. First is coverage by the WCAG success criteria. For WCAG 2.1 level AA, for example, there are 50 success criteria, 50 specific testable conditions. And you can say, if I tested 40 of those 50, I'm getting at 80% coverage. That's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is by the defect volume. So how many total defects can be found in content on the page. And if that number is 50 and I found 40, I'm covering 80% of the total defects found. When you get to 100%, these two schools of thoughts actually converge, right? When you're getting to 100%, you will be finding all the defects and you will be testing everything that needs to be tested. So it's just a different way of looking at coverage from two different angles. Where it becomes interesting is, how does a developer think about it? I'm showing on my screen an image of a developer sitting in front of his computer with lots of technologies that he's thinking of. Different requirements that have been given to him by the product owner. And in his mind, he's thinking about, well, how can I deliver quality code in the least amount of time? Time is of the most importance here. So when I think about a developer like that, I took two terms out of this thought that he has in his head. He's thinking about quality code. Another way to think about quality code is fewer defects. I don't want to get as many defects, or actually I want to get 0 defects sent back to me in the code that I delivered. The second thing is least amount of time, which means I don't want to do any rework. If a solution has been implemented for something, I want to reuse it as long as it works well. And it is also related to fewer defects, because if a defect comes back to me, it is actually rework for me. So I want to actually reduce the amount of time by delivering fewer defects, and I want to reduce the amount of rework. So if I'm thinking about a developer, I'm also always thinking about the defect volume. That's where the realization came to us when we were talking about it. So DQ did a study. We have the unique ability to look at the number of manual issues and automated issues. We provide services as well. And as part of that, we get access to some data. This data gives us ability to see how many issues are actually being found by automation and how many issues are actually found by manual testing only. So we published a study back in 2021. This study actually found that up to 57, or on an average, 57.38% of total issues can be detected using automated tests. Automated tests meaning click of a button. You don't have to do anything other than clicking a button. You can find 57% of the issues just by doing that. Then we followed up with another study in March 2022, where we actually included semi-automated testing. And the results were even more encouraging. We found that up to 80%, on an average 80%, total issues were detected using automated and semi-automated tests. So really what's left to be covered by manual tests is about 20%. So that's what I'm thinking of as a product owner, that how can I reduce the time in testing? And that adds a different benefit. If I can tell my developer to use these tools without really spending a lot of time learning about WCAG, imagine the amount of time that can be saved by running this during development and finding out what the issues can be and fixing them right there. So let me show you what the study actually included. I'm going to open it up in a different browser. And I'm sorry about the scroll. I have to scroll a little bit to take you to the salient areas. The study had actually included more than 13,000 pages for first-time audits only. Meaning, if we tested a page first time, sent it back to developers to fix, and it came to a second time, we actually dropped the results for second time to remove any biases from it. And as a result of this methodology, we tested over 300,000 issues. So the 57% number that I'm telling you, it has come with a study over 13,000 different pages or page states with over 300,000 issues. And here are some interesting things that we found. Only the top 5 success criteria, right? If remember, I told you 50 success criteria in WCAG 2.1 AA. 5 of them contributed to more than 78% of the issues. And it gets better. If you expand that number of success criteria to 15, that covers almost 95% of the issues. So very fascinating results that we found as part of the study. So if you have not had a chance to look at it, the link is in the deck that we will share with you. Take a chance, take some time to read through this. We actually break down all the information in terms of numbers as well, and different success criteria where we found most of the issues. For example, for color contrast, we found 30% of all issues were coming from color contrast issues. Back to the presentation though. So we conducted this study where we found up to 80% of the issues can be easily found using automated and semi-automated tests. So I actually plotted that information on a bar and line chart. So I'm showing on my screen right now. It's a chart with two things. It's a bar chart overlaid with a line chart. The red line, that actually gives you the cumulative percentage of total number of issues that have been found using the success criteria. The x-axis is the top 10 success criteria. The y-axis is the percentage number. And the number for the line chart, the cumulative percentage of issues found, starts from 30% for color contrast, and with just these top 10, goes all the way up to 90.22%. So a vast majority of the defects can be found by just focusing on 10 specific WCAG success criteria. The bars here actually represent what percentage of issues in that category were found using automation alone. So name role value, which is the second bar over here, that's sitting at about 95, 96%. What that tells you is if there were 100 issues found using name role value, 96 of them were discovered using automation. So very, very high percentage. So for the purpose of this conversation here, we're going to focus on top 3. And let me tell you a little bit about why top 3. We picked 3 specific issues: name role value, information and info and relationships, and finally keyboard. We skipped color contrast, thinking it's very, very designer focused, and we wanted to be developer focused for this conversation. So that's why we skipped color contrast. We came to name role value, info and relationship, which were the next 2 highest items. The parsing category is an interesting one. For those of you who may not have heard yet, WCAG 2.2, there's a conversation about dropping parsing from that WCAG success criteria. So that's why we skipped this one, that there's still question marks about it. Then we started thinking about, well, what's the criticality, the impact of these issues? And we picked keyboard because if you cannot access any functionality using keyboard, you are actually limiting access to the application for a large number of users. So these are the 3 specific success criteria we're focusing on because of volume associated with them and because the impact that they have on your users. And here's the very interesting part. Collectively, these 3 make up nearly 30% of all accessibility issues, just these 3 success criteria. And 27.5% of that can be found using automation. So if there were 100 total issues, we're talking with just these 3 categories, more than 27 issues can be found and fixed, found using automation and very easily fixed, as Harris will show you. Let's talk a little bit more about these 3 specific issues. Interestingly, you will notice they're all level A WCAG success criteria, meaning they are the most basic level of conformance. Name role value, they're in no specific order. Name role value, that requirement really talks about every component on your web page must have a name. It should specify its role, and it should display and announce its values. Think about an accordion component, for example. The accordion component itself, if someone gets to that accordion component using a screen reader, if the screen reader doesn't announce that whether the component is expanded or collapsed, you're missing a key piece of information. That's where this criteria becomes very important. Info and relationship. This is where you're talking about the information structure and the relationships on the page to be conveyed using programmatic relationships. Heading structure, for example. Screen reader users use headings for navigation. And if you don't have good navigation hierarchy, headings hierarchy, they cannot use this information. The third, keyboard, really talks about everything should be operable through a keyboard. A lot of users don't use a mouse. They use keyboards to navigate through the content. And if a control on your app, on your website is not accessible using keyboard, you're limiting a complete section from being usable by these people. So in the next part of this conversation, Harris will show you how you can easily look for these items and then fix them during the part of development itself. Over to you, Harris.
All right, thank you, Sachin. I'm going to share my screen now. I just have a few slides, and then we're going to get into actual demos. So to expand on what Sachin just covered, with our three kind of pillars of our top accessibility issues, within each of those pillars, I want to explain a little bit about what we're going to be finding and fixing. So for name role value, the issues we're going to be looking at, and kind of examples of name role value issues, are buttons missing, custom buttons missing the expected role, either using semantic HTML with a button tag or role equals button. Then we're going to be looking at some icon button and links that are missing accessible names. So a link or button with nothing but a nameless icon as a child of it. There won't be any name information for a screen reader to gather. Therefore, it's an empty button for screen readers users and non-sighted users. We're also going to be taking a look at the expanded collapse state not being conveyed to assistive technology. Had a question in chat about that. This does involve using the ARIA expanded attribute, but I'll actually showcase that here in a minute. And some of the automation tools we're going to be using for name role value are the Axe accessibility linter for VS Code. I'll cover that here in a second. If you have questions about it, we'll see a live demo, in fact. We're going to be using Axe Core's automated scan feature from the Axe DevTools browser extension. And we're going to be running the Interactive Elements Intelligent Guided Test, or IGT. Sachin mentioned the term semi-automated testing. That's what the Intelligent Guided Test will cover, so you know. We also have info relationships. Specifically, we're going to be looking at form elements without labels. And as Sachin already said, things like headings without the expected heading semantics. So something that visually appears like a heading, like on this slide, for instance, the title says info and relationships, that should be a heading, right? But if we don't use the right semantics, that won't be exposed to non-sighted users. The tools we'll be using to find these kinds of issues, Axe linter for VS Code again, Axe Core scan, but we'll be running the structure and forms intelligent guided tests as well. And finally, keyboard, I think one of the more fun and tricky things to test for, things like elements that are inaccessible by keyboard and have no conforming alternate, and actually scrollable regions that don't have keyboard access. Side note there, scrollable regions need to, especially without focusable children, need to be focusable. So keyboard only users can actually scroll the content inside of that scrollable region. And we're going to be running the keyboard intelligent guided test to find some of those issues, as well as the Axe Core automated scan. So without further ado, I'm going to get into demos. We're going to leave PowerPoint for a little bit. So I want to show you, set some context. I've drafted a very simple page. What we're looking at is, I'm in my Chrome browser, have a page with a heading that says how to find and fix the top 3 accessibility issues. Also happens to be the title of this talk. And a simple form, first name. There's actually a tooltip that explains what a first name is. Last name, a terms and conditions checkbox that also has a expand collapse When the terms and conditions are expanded, there is a scrollable region with terms and conditions mapped out there. Below that, we have a print icon link and a submit and cancel button. Nothing too crazy there. So first, let's look at linter for VS Code. What that is, for those who don't know what the term lint means, this is a very developer-focused term. When writing code, there's a concept of linting your code. For certain languages, that might involve something that will cause your code to not be able to compile. In terms of accessibility, it's actually statically analyzing your code, your source code for your application. In our case, we're going to be looking at mostly HTML. And as you're typing in VS Code, we'll be running lint checks using Axe Core under the hood, and that will yell at me when I do things wrong that can cause accessibility issues. So this is an example of something that can be embedded in a developer's IDE or their text editor rather, and it can kind of slap the wrist when they're doing something that's going to cause an accessibility issue. So better than me explaining would be to demonstrate this. So what I just did, actually, let me zoom in on my text editor. I'm in VS Code now. We're looking at the HTML source code for the application or the web page I just described. You'll see we have that same heading, how to find and fix top 3 accessibility issues in the header, and then inside the main content we have our form. So what I'm looking at now are little red squiggly lines, kind of like a spell check in a Word document. And when I hover over it with my mouse, it says linter ensures buttons have discernible text. So right now I have a button that has no text content at all. And as a developer, if I'm typing in this code, it will actually yell at me for not doing that. So it's one way to find that type of issue. Another example we have here is an input without a label, and linter is saying, hey, you must ensure every form element has a label. And finally, we have our print icon link that also does not have discernible text. There are other cool things that linter can do. Let's say I want to add an image. So I've actually opened up this button without a name, and I'm typing an image tag, foo.png. It's also going to yell at me saying, hey, you have an image with no alternate text, or you haven't marked it as a presentational image, which would require alt equals quote quote or role of presentation or none. So right there, it's catching some of the low-hanging fruit. If I add alt equals quote quote to mark it as decorative, it goes away. The red squiggly line goes away, and I have a good image. But it's also it's pretty smart. So if I added text here in the alt, oops, hello world, you'll see that the button issue that said the buttons must have discernible text goes away because the image is now providing the accessible name as a child of the button for the button. So it's kind of cool. It's clever, and it can really help. I personally use it all the time, and it helps catch some of those easy to find issues. So just one example of automation. It's free for anyone to use. So if you want to go to the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, you can find Axe Accessibility Linter. I highly recommend it. It's pretty awesome. So let's move back to our application, and let's find and fix some of those issues. So we could actually fix these issues right now, obviously, but not everyone is a developer. Not everyone has VS Code. I want to show how we find those same kinds of issues with different types of automation, and then find some more. So beside my trusty form that I just described, I have the Axe DevTools extension opened up on the right-hand side. I've tried to zoom in so you can see everything. And the Axe DevTools browser extension pretty much will, from a click of a button, run Axe Core. So I'm going to click this, scan all of my page. And what's happening behind the scenes is Axe Core just scanned the HTML page and spat out some results. In this case, we have 4 accessibility issues that it found. Once again, buttons without discernible text, form elements without labels, links without discernible text, and actually found that there's a scrollable region that doesn't have keyboard access. So I haven't had to do anything but click a button. And for actually 3 of these 4 issues, I could have actually caught those in my text editor before I even saved the file, which is awesome. But before we go off and fix those, I want to do some more testing so we can maybe find some more interesting issues. So what I'm going to do is save my test. This save feature will create a persistent record of the scan we just took. and allow me to run intelligent guided tests, or those semi-automatic tests that Sachin described. This is a Axe Pro feature, so it is behind our paywall, but pretty powerful stuff. You'll see here in a minute just how powerful it can be with the semi-automatic tests. So I'm going to jump right into those. We have tons of awesome demos and documentation on this extension. If you're unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend checking it out. We just don't have enough time to cover those specifics today. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the interactive elements intelligent guided test. So I do that by, in the extension, saying start interactive elements test, clicking on that button, and it's asking me to get the page in the right state. I want to make sure I test the expanded state just so we can get all this extra content in the scrollable region. So I'm going to make sure I keep that expanded while I'm running my tests. So without further ado, I'm going to hit start. And it's saying, please wait while our AI scans for interactive elements. There's some pretty cool machine learning, machine vision, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, built into this tool. And what it can actually do for me automatically is it identified something that we might have a problem with. So it's pre-selected this cancel button as an interactive element that was missing. I'm on the question that says we've highlighted seven interactive elements we could find. Are there any interactive elements we missed? So the AI actually did the work for me and selected this cancel button that's clearly not marked up as a button. So that's a problem already. So it's really cool, powerful that the machine learning, it actually took a screenshot of the page and it said, oh, that thing right there, that cancel control with the gray background, it looks like a button, but it's not. Let's make sure that the tester, who can be a complete accessibility novice, reviews that control. So it pre-selected it for me. I'm going to hit next now. So it's taking some more screenshots to make our testing easier. And it's asking me to select which of the now 8 interactive elements on the page I want to test. Let's test them all. Should be pretty quick. So I selected all, and now we're going to go and iterate through each of the 8 interactive elements. And it's saying validate the accessible name, role, and state of each element below. And then it'll ask us a few questions. So again, we're talking about the first name input. I have it highlighted in the actual test page, and I'm interacting with the browser extension on the right-hand side. And it's presenting me with the accessible name is name, which maybe isn't the best because it's first name specifically. We have a role of text box, which is good, and there's no applicable states for the element, which is what I'd expect. It's not disabled, it's not in a read-only state. So let's answer some questions. It says, does the accessible name and hint name accurately describe the element's meaning? No, I don't think it does the trick. It needs to probably match the visible text there that I see that is first name. Otherwise, I wouldn't know the difference between first and last. The role is good, as I said, and there's no applicable state, so I'm going to move on to the next element. Now we're looking at the information icon button that has a tooltip when I hover or focus it. It actually has no accessible name, as the Axe Core automatic scan pointed out, as Axe linter for VS Code pointed out. So we don't need to answer a question there. The role is button, which I think is good, and there are no applicable states. So again, moving on to the next element, we're on to the last name field, which actually doesn't have an accessible name at all. Axe Core has told us that already, and there's no applicable states. All right, now we're to a stateful component. When I say stateful, a state describes the state that an element is currently in. And to try to define that without using the word itself, states are attributes that are mutable. They can change based on the context of the page. So things like checkboxes usually have at least 2 states, checked and unchecked. Sometimes they have complicated enough a mixed state, and sometimes it can be disabled. But for this purpose of this specific checkbox, I agree to the terms and conditions. It's never going to be disabled. It's either going to be checked or unchecked, right? So the accessible name, I agree to the terms and conditions. That makes sense. The role is checkbox. That makes sense. And actually, it found some applicable states, in this case, not checked. So accessible name's great, role's great, and not checked is selected here. It actually will let us test another state. So I'm going to click this test another state for this element because we want to test the check state to make sure that's conveyed. So it's saying, okay, cool, put the element into the new state and then click check element state when ready. And sure enough, it actually found that it is properly conveyed. We have this checked state selected here in the dropdown. And so I think we're good to go on all the applicable states for that checkbox, and we'll move on to the next element. This one's also fun. We have the terms and conditions expand, collapse, accordion thing, whatever you want to call it. And what that does is when I click it, it will expand and collapse the pane, as I'll refer to it, with the terms and conditions scrollable region. So its accessible name, terms and conditions, does accurately describe the element's meaning. Perfect. Its role, I think, is off. It's set to a link right now. I want to make it a button, so I'm going to select button. That will inform the intelligent guided test that maybe there's a problem with which role has been applied to this element. And let's test the state. So it's saying it didn't find an applicable expanded state. We want to tell the tool that it's currently in the expanded state. So I selected that. And then I want to test another state. So I'm going to collapse it, test another state for this element. I've already put it in the collapsed state. I'm going to say check again. And then I want to select collapsed. And that tells the tool that, you know, to validate that I'm marking that up as collapsed properly, which, as I kind of revealed earlier, that's going to involve using the ARIA expanded attribute. So I'm going to hit next again, and we've moved on to the print link. No accessible name. We've already been pointed that out. We have the right role, and there's no applicable states. And second to last is the submit button. Its accessible name is submit, and its role is button. So I'm going to leave everything as is. And finally, the cancel button has the right accessible name of cancel. No role on it. Remember, the AI actually selected it for us. Otherwise, it would have been included in the initial list of buttons we found on the page. And I'm going to select button for the role. And there are no applicable states. So I think we're done here. So walking through those few questions, we found 5 accessibility issues. We have missing name, missing role, states and properties, in this case, ARIA expanded, are being conveyed in both the expanded and collapsed state, and more role issues. So I'm going to hit finish. We're going to review those issues on a more granular level here in a minute. On the results screen, it did have some links to resources about each issue. We have, I think it's under the text, more info for the given issue. And that will explain how we went about finding the issue and why it's an issue and how you might go about fixing it. But we'll get to that here in a minute. So we just run the interactive elements tool. I want to run the structure tool now. And this will cover, for the purpose of this demo, this will cover our heading tests. We want to make sure our headings are marked up properly. It's saying, hey, are there any headings on the page? Yes, there are. And for what it's worth, for future reference, if there were actual headings, semantic headings on the page, it would have presented those to us. But in our case, nothing's marked as a heading, unfortunately, which we'll fix here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and select what I think the H1 is, which is how to find and fix the top 3 accessibility issues. And then I'm also going to select the terms and conditions. And how I made that selection was just with a point and click with my mouse. If you're a keyboard user or a power user, we actually have a DOM tree here at the bottom where you can arrow key around just like a tree view and make your selections with keyboard only. Moving on to the next question, it's asking me that if each of the headings text accurately describe the content that immediately follows it. In both cases, it's good text. There's nothing generic or non-descriptive about it, so I'm going to leave those as is. Now it's going to ask me a few more questions about the content on my page. There are no lists. There's no language changes. The page title is great here. How to find it. The page title matches the H1 text. I think that's good. I'm going to leave that as a yes. And we're done. So it was able to find, I'm guessing, 2 issues just by us answering a couple questions and identifying the missing headings on the page. So we have 2 issues of text appears in functions like a section heading, but it's not marked up as such. So I can even do things like inspect it and go, oh yeah, div class title, silly me. I should have made that H1 class title probably, which we'll look at doing here in a minute. So I'm gonna hit finish. Got a couple more tools I want to run through before I want to go back to my text editor and fix all of our issues. And then we can verify to make sure all the fixes work as expected. So next up, we will run the forms tool. I'm saving the keyboard tool for last because it's my favorite. So forms tool is going to, the forms IGT is going to walk us through the testing of our form. In our case, we have one single form on the page and it found it, it's highlighting it. And when I say it's highlighting it, it actually has a little pink or purple, I don't know, highlight ring around the element that it's talking about. And in our case, we want to just test this form and it's highlighting the form. So I'm going to say yes. There's more cool AI involved here behind the scenes. It's taking a screenshot of the form and it's looking for things like visible text labels, and it will allow us to actually skip some questions here, making our testing more efficient and fast. And as Sachin said, time in the context of a business is one of the most important things. So we want to make sure that you can test your forms quickly. So it found 3 form fields, and it says click next to continue. It's asking me now if I want to test this first name field that is highlighted. I do. I'm going to say yes. Is it part of a group of related fields? No. Group of related fields, if for those who might be confused by that question, are things like field sets or radio groups. So sometimes there are groups of checkboxes or radios that are all kind of part of the same group. Sometimes there's things like phone numbers and social security number inputs that are a series of in both those cases, 3 text inputs that are kind of part of the same group. So that's why there's different requirements in terms of testing for accessibility of form fields for groups. So we do have to ask that up front. In our case, we're not going to be testing any groups today. So it's asking me now, is there a visible label? Yes, there is. Does it stay visible all the time? Yes. For those confused about that question, you might have seen out in the wild those pesky placeholder labels that disappear when you start typing text into them. That can be confusing for just about any user, especially when there are browser extensions that might auto-populate some fields, and you won't ever see that empty state with the visible label. So that can cause problems. But in our case, even when I start typing in the field, we're good. The label stays visible. The visible label that I see is first name, and I think that does accurately describe the purpose of the field. And now it's asking me again about the name of this. I know we did cover that in the interactive elements tool, but with forms, there's a different requirement that the programmatic label, in this case name, should match the visible label. It's usually a bad idea to have a mismatch there. So I'm going to say no. The text name doesn't match first name. Those are 2 different things. One's not descriptive enough, as the interactive elements tool pointed out to us. There's no stars or symbols or text that says required for any of these fields. So I'm going to say no. I was way too lazy to write any validation for this. So I'm going to say no. There's actually no errors in this form, but the forms tool does do a good job of testing your error states for you by asking a few questions. So there's no errors. We're going to test the last name field. It's not part of a group. It has a visible label. It stays visible all the time. It accurately describes the purpose, its last name. And remember, we already got an Axe core issue for this form field not having a label at all. Actually, Axe linter for VS Code also told us that. Same thing here. Unfortunately, no form errors. And let's skip. Well, we can test this checkbox. It's not part of a group. The label stays visible all the time. The visible label, I agree to the terms and conditions. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's a pretty good descriptor of what the checkbox's purpose is. And that is what is being presented to us as the programmatic label. So I'm going to say yes. And now we're being asked questions about the form itself. If it submits a financial transaction, a legal commitment, or a student test or exam. In this case, no. But for those curious about why we asked that, there are specific WCAG requirements that require users to be able to review their answers before finally submitting, or at least reverse their answers for those kinds of financial commitments or student tests or exams. So we found one issue that is specifically the programmatic label and visible label do not convey consistent information. Like I said, you can always read more about any issue that we find by clicking the more info link. I'm going to finish. We got one last test to do, and it should be a breeze. This one's one of our more automated intelligent guided tests, and it is the keyboard test. So it's saving my test. Wonderful. I'm going to click start keyboard run, and we're going to find some keyboard issues, hopefully. So again, make sure my page is in the right state, and then I can click start. And what's going to happen when I click start is it's going to start automatically tabbing through the page. I'm not the one hitting tab. Promise, the robots are. And so I'm going to hit start, and it should start tabbing through the page automatically. As it's doing that, we have highlights with numbers appearing in the top left corner. That's kind of enumerating the tab stops. And in this case, it found 7 tab stops. Why I really like this tool is that it actually assesses things that are really hard for even experts to test, like focus indication being present. And with WCAG 2.2, we'll be able to enable a rule that tests focus indication sufficiency, meaning, yes, there's a focus indicator, but is it sufficiently visible so sighted users can actually tell what element is actually active in focus. That's something that's really hard to test, even as an expert. You have to kind of peel into the developer tools, look at what styles are applied when it's focused. If they're using JavaScript to inline those styles, it's even harder as a non-developer, or at least someone who doesn't really run the content with the source code themselves. So that's why I really like this tool. It's really powerful. So next, it's asking me, were there any elements that I expected in the tab order but were not? Yes, I know the cancel button should be. I also know that the scroll region should be there, but for time's sake, I'm just going to click next. And sure enough, we got an additional issue on the cancel button. So it's not only is it missing a button role, but it's also missing a focusability aspect. So it wasn't focused. It didn't show up in the natural tab order. So we have two things to fix with that cancel button. It's become quite a nuisance for us. So now that we've found a bunch of issues, yay, good job, automation. I want to walk through how we can fix those issues and actually how we can verify that they are fixed. If I go back into the overview tab here in the extension, I can actually isolate just the issues we found with the guided tools. We have some role issues with the terms and conditions. We have a role issue on that cancel button. So let's start with those two. I'm going to go back into my text editor and fix both of those. So first issue, terms and conditions. We told the intelligent guided test that it should be a button and it's marked up like a link. So because there's a number of ways we can solve this. The right way is probably to use a button tag for styling purposes. You can get away with a role button. You do have to then write some JavaScript that will activate the control on space, and you have to make sure it's focusable. With our href, it is focusable. But we'll save writing the JavaScript for after this call. So I've added role button to the terms and conditions control. And now I'm going to address the same kind of issue on the cancel button. Well, let's use semantic HTML here so you can see both ways. So right now, what I have, I've scrolled my editor to the cancel button source code, which reads div class equals button. And then there's some text inside of it, a text node that says cancel, and then the closing div tag. What we want to do is actually change that to a proper button. So I've replaced the div text with button. And so that's actually using an HTML native button control, which comes with that spacebar activation functionality, focusability, all that good stuff. So we actually, just by changing that tag, fixed two of the issues we found with our IGTs. Moving on, I think we just addressed both of those. States and properties. We have the expanded and collapsed state of the terms and conditions not being conveyed. So what we can do is set RE expanded equals false on that. Let me find the control. There it is. It starts off in a collapsed state. And again, we would write some JavaScript that on click of this button, we toggle RE expanded. And actually, I can do that for real with one line of code. Terms and conditions is my handle on the element. I will set the attribute RE expanded to the opposite of what it was before. So that's a way to toggle it. And so I think we just addressed those issues. Next, we have the two headings that weren't marked up as headings. I'm going to fix both of those real quick. Remember when I inspected it, it said something, yeah, div class title. Silly me, this should actually be an H1. So I'm going to update the tag to H1 from div. And then we want to fix the terms and conditions heading to be, let's say, an H2. That's definitely up for debate what you'd want that to be. If you're doing it in isolation, it might make sense to be an H1, but since we're in the context of this parent document, we will leave it as an H2. I think that's fine. And moving on, we need to fix the name of the inputs, and we actually have an input missing a name. So let's do it the right way. I added an ARIA label equals name. That's not the right way to do it. Let's give this input an ID that we can reference and label. So I'm going to say ID equals first name, copy that ID, and add the for attribute to the label of first name. So that's a way that screen readers will be able to tie this label as the accessible label for this input by referencing this input's ID in the labels for attribute. So same thing here. We'll give it a ID of last name and associate it with HTML4.
Just a time check, Harris.
Okay, time check. Thank you. I think we fixed everything. Let's go through a couple more. We got that, and we needed to make sure that the cancel button was focusable, but by updating it to a button, we should be good to go. So we did just find and fix a bunch of issues. As an example, I won't go through every single tool again, but we want to rerun each of the IGTs that we ran. For time's sake, I will spare you, and we can just run through a couple of these. Let's do one interactive elements tool run. So this time around, it shouldn't have any robot selected items, and we actually see the cancel button selected already. That's what we wanted to see. Hooray. And select all, and we'll go through these quite quickly. I apologize for time's sake. We just validated that the accessible name of the first input now says is first name. That's a yes now. We said no previously. No states. We forgot to update the accessible name of the information icon. Sorry, we can do that easily by adding an ARIA label equals first name help or something. Last name. Before this group was actually disabled because it had no accessible name. In this case, now that we fixed it, it says last name, which is what I'd expect. Hooray, we fixed that issue. Checkbox, that was already good to go. We didn't change anything there, so I'm going to leave that as is. Terms and conditions. We have the expanded states actually wrong. I probably messed up my code, sorry. We want it to be expanded, and we can go and test the collapse state. And print, we didn't fix that issue yet. Submit button has the right text, has the right role. And cancel, this is one we did fix. It now has the accessible name text, or accessible name cancel, and the role of button, and no applicable states. So with that, we should just have one remaining issue of me messing up my JavaScript for the expanded state. So let me do that, and that's how we can validate that we fixed all of our issues. We could go through the rest of the tools, but you get the point. The idea here is to use automation to help you find the accessibility issues, use the information presented to you based on the accessibility issues to fix the issues in your source code, and run those same exact automation tools, leverage those same tools to validate. So it's kind of find, fix, validate, repeat. And I'm going to fix one more issue before I hand it back to Sachin. For the first name tooltip trigger, I'm going to say first name help should be the name of that tooltip trigger. Back to you, Sachin.
So we did talk about how we can prevent these issues from getting into the QA state at all, right? So Harris talked about how to fix a lot of these issues, which included code solutions. And you may have got the feeling, I certainly got the feeling, that developer needs to know a little bit in order to be able to do everything that Harris was doing. So how do we actually help developer even more? And that's where your role as a designer becomes very important. And I'm gonna not go and show all the blog, which is linked in the slide here. I'll let you read on your own. But there are expert opinion poll and the expert opinion polls. And the blog also point to the fact that about somewhere between 40 and 80% of all accessibility issues can be prevented with design practices that promote accessibility. And blog actually gives you some heuristics around it. So with that in mind, how can a designer help a developer? In a lot of cases, I'm showing on my screen a Figma design for the screen that Harris was doing all the coding for. This is how it is shared with the developer. It's just a plain old design with all the styles applied. It's showing how the screen should look like. And now a lot of decisions are left on the developer to make. He had a terms and conditions link there. Should that be a link? Should that be a button? There was an arrow right next to it. What should happen to that? There's a print icon there. What should happen to that? So a lot of decisions are being left on the developer to make, which is great, in terms of coding efficiency, but it can also be very difficult to make an accessible application if developers make choices that are not intended by the designers. So what if this design was actually enhanced with some accessibility annotations? I'm showing the same design now in a Figma file that has accessibility annotations built in. I have not covered everything that Harris was covering, but I have covered main features. On my screen, I'm showing the how to find and fix the top 3 accessibility issues. That element is selected and it's saying H1, use either H1 tag or use a roll of heading with ARIA level 1. Going on to the first name element, this should be the label for first name text field. The text field first name, it's input type text. The information icon next to it should have a roll of button or should be using button tags. And it should have an ARIA label for more information. So I'm passing on all that information to the developer with these annotations. And it's actually not that difficult to add these annotations. I used the Axe for Designer product with it. It's a beta product right now that we are developing. We would love to have your feedback on it. I will quickly show you how you can add these kind of annotations to it. So I'm in Figma now. It's a Figma plugin. We'll share the link with you as well. I'm going to show you one very quick annotation. On this plugin, I'm going to go and run the free plugin. And I'll go straight to the annotation feature. Let's say I want to annotate the information button that was on the screen. I'll simply select this button. I'm looking for annotations for links and buttons. And I'll say the primary annotation here is button. Simply go ahead and say add to, you can decide where it should appear. And I'm going to say add to right. This is it. You have just got yourself an annotation for button that can be passed on to the developer. So for each of the components, you can go ahead and add the annotations wherever you want to convey more information. You can add multiple annotations to the same component as well. The idea here is to take that decision making, make it very, very easy for developer to implement, right? The developers are very, very smart on how to solve a problem as long as they know what the problem is. And in this case, the designers can tell them, hey, developer, your problem is to make sure that that I component, it should be a button. And now Harris knows how to fix that problem.
And it's really just as easy to do it right from the start if I had that information up front. We kind of did things in reverse order today, but that was to show you something more realistic. But as a developer, if I'm given some wireframes with all this information mapped out for me, it's so easy to add a label and the right role as I'm building the content out. And it's a lot harder to go back and change things, undo styles and all that nonsense. So can't stress enough how important it is to think of this up front before you're authoring that content.
Excellent. I do want to leave a few minutes. Sorry, we're running a little behind for question and answer. So let me go back to my slides here. I've already showed you this, so I'm not going to spend any more time. Very quick recap. I'll leave it on the screen here. We did talk about how you can automate almost 80% of the issues by using automation. And fixing those issues as part of the development process itself can save time. Harris showed you some examples by addressing all 3 kinds of issues that we set out to solve. And you can become even more efficient by using annotations in design. And there are tools now available in the market that you can use to provide those annotations for accessibility. With that, any questions for us?
I do want to thank both you, Sachin and Harris, for a great presentation today, an awesome demo, tons of great questions. I did also just drop a link in the chat for our Axe Slack community. If you're not already a member there, a lot of the Axe team members, including us, are there. And if you have questions or are using the tools and want to connect, please feel free to join that community. But let's grab a couple questions here. Harris and Sachin, if you want to hop in the Q&A, are any of these jumping out that you'd like to cover in the couple minutes that we have here? I did see one on one specifically on, or there were a couple ones asking about the top 3 accessibility issues when considering a mobile app experience. I'm not sure, Sachin, if you can speak to that at a high level, or.
Can you repeat that question there, Liz?
Yeah, from Zach, how do the top 3 accessibility issues change when considering a mobile app experience? So a couple people were asking how things differ between what y'all were reviewing in the mobile apps.
Excellent question. So the data that we presented was primarily for HTML, which means that we were actually covering web view and mobile view. That did not include the native apps. The data, the top 3 issues will differ for native apps for primarily 2 reasons. The capabilities on mobile apps are different as compared to an HTML website. And the second thing is the level of automation possible in a mobile app. That varies very highly, not only between HTML and mobile app, but also between iOS and Android. So when we think about the top 3 issues for native apps, you have to think about top 3 issues for iOS or top 3 issues for Android, and they will be different from what we covered today.
Right. Thank you, Sachin. Harris, any questions you want to pick out of the mix here?
Well, I think we answered the accordion one, and I did just fix the JavaScript. If I had moved that toggling line up 1, it would have worked. So sorry about that. Will the accessibility linter be available beyond just VS Code? We have some devs that are not using Visual Studio. I believe there are plans to do that. The team, if anyone from that team is listening, sorry for throwing them in the bus, but I do believe we are going to be supporting more than just VS Code. And there's also some pretty new stuff in the works for linting that go outside of your IDE. That can be in the form of like something like a GitHub action, or actually a server that you can send snippets of code or HTML or whatever it might be to have it process and lint that. And so you can hook into things like pre-commit hooks and have it lint your code before you even push your code to your source control. So we're trying to find out great ways to make that linting portable and meet everyone's needs. So it will be available definitely outside the context of Visual Studio Code specifically, and we'll likely have some IDE integrations coming in the future.
Awesome.
There's one more question, Liz, that I would like to take.
Awesome.
There's a question about do we have any product or any tools which can be thrown in the pipeline to check final rendered pages? As part of DevTools suite, we do have APIs that can get integrated directly into your tests. So your front-end tests can include the DevTools APIs, which will run on your existing end-to-end tests. So you can actually integrate that with your in your CI/CD pipeline and run those tests on rendered code.
Awesome. Thanks, Sachin. I do want to thank Sachin and Harris again for an awesome webinar today. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.